Hello everyone and welcome. I hope your day's been going well. This is Norm, and you are listening right now to the Normcast. I hope that does not come as a surprise to you. We try to clearly label these things. Today's episode may be a bit of a short and or scattershot one since I don't really have a lot that is pressing to talk about. Make no mistake, things are happening. I'm just not certain that they are interesting to anyone but me at this point. And with E3 out of the way, the world of video games really has not been offering a whole lot, at least if you have the same level of utter disinterest in the Activision Blizzard merger as I do. A lot of drama there, but I am not going to be the one to cover it. This past week saw the 4th of July, known internationally as America's Cinco de Mayo. I hope those of you who celebrated America's birthday did so with a minimum of fires and bodily harm and a maximum of grilled beef and pork products. I myself manned the Frankfurter grill at our family's cookout. It was technically cooked outside on a grill, but it was eaten indoors because while we were celebrating with family and friends, nature was celebrating with humidity. Just tossing that stuff around like confetti. Anyway, here is to America. It certainly has its problems, but you don't spend somebody's birthday telling them how fat and old they look now. I mean, yes, you think it. Prior to the celebrations, a couple nights before, our regular VR movie watching group did our patriotic duty and watched Nicolas Cage in National Treasure. I was going to say that it's an underrated film, but the truth of the matter is I don't really know the public consensus on National Treasure at this point. It seems like it had a good to marginal reception back when it first premiered. Yes, I am old enough to remember it, but it obviously never rose to the heights of a Indiana Jones or Brendan Fraser's The Mummy. With that said, anytime I see it in print, it is generally in a positive light, probably tinged a bit with nostalgia, but so is everything at a certain age. And I mean, the movie is not a masterpiece, so honestly, maybe it's overrated. I consider it better than 2.5 stars, not quite 3 stars. Though I would be willing to nudge it over the line just because it managed to package at least a couple pieces of American history trivia in a non-obtrusive form that stayed with you at least 5 minutes after you left the theater. Tell me, viewers, is National Treasure edutainment? Moving along, since we clearly are already scraping the bottom of the news barrel, let's go back a week or so prior to this, and there was a minor PR kerfluffle during one of the interviews regarding CD Projekt Red's upcoming Cyberpunk 2077 expansion Phantom Liberty. This was back around the 28th of June, and CD Projekt Red executive Michael Galuski? He does come across as a bit of a Galuski in this. Anyway, he was asked about the public reception back around Cyberpunk's fairly disastrous launch, and he made a statement that a lot of people took issue with, which was that essentially Cyberpunk at launch was not as bad it was made out to be, and that it became, quote, the cool thing to hate on. More or less stating that they had a solid game there, minus the bugs. But once the first few rough reviews started coming in, everybody kind of started dogpiling on it and making it out to be much worse than it was. Now, he got what I would say was a fairly justifiably large amount of flack for this statement, but my own personal feelings on it were a bit more ambivalent. To start with, I do actually see where he's coming from because I played Cyberpunk at launch, and if you ignored the performance issues and bugs, and that is frankly a big ask, but at the same time, we're trying to be empathetic here, but if you looked past all the bugs, there was in fact a very good story, a fairly solid game, so long as you had not paid any attention to the advertising up to that point. Now, the bugs and performance issues, those are their own complete separate thing. I can largely overlook them because, well, I am a Bethesda fan, so except for real game-breaking bugs, which I did encounter on my first playthrough, I got to a rooftop segment and the game essentially got stuck in a loop where it did not trigger the next event and the next stage never started, and I was in the middle of a mission and literally had to contact CD Projekt support where they said, oh yeah, you need to start a new game. So that one I could not overlook, but usually when it comes to just graphical glitches. Because I am in that Bethesda mindset, my mind just kind of filters them out. Let me see the game underneath. And so I do see their side of it, because if you went in blind and you just, somebody handed you, hey, here is 1 unit of game, play this and tell me what you think, I'd have come away with fairly favorable impressions of the game that was delivered. But very importantly, it was not the game that was promised. Now, that's a whole separate lecture, and I'm not going to get into it here, but suffice it to say that the game that was delivered initially did not have anywhere near the choice, consequence, or RPG elements that were used in the advertising to sell the game to the public. As time has gone on, several of those elements have been added into the base game, and it is quite a bit beyond what it originally was. Still has a long way to go, but I'll reserve judgment until after I've played Phantom Liberty, which is supposed to be introducing a almost ground-level retooling of all the game's major systems. But in any case, Cyberpunk 2077 has enjoyed something of a redemption arc recently. I'm glad to see it. The developers have their heart in the right place. The game has a lot of potential, but no, it was not the victim of a smear campaign. Pretty much all the criticism it got at launch, it earned that honestly. Every scathing review, every bug compilation, CD Projekt, particularly management, was complicit in making sure it was delivered in that state, and also in ensuring that the public was expecting a much different state. So those are my thoughts. Take that news article from 3 or 4 weeks ago. Okay, so last thing, like I said, we are in the doldrums so far as the news cycle, so I think it's appropriate to mention a film I watched for the first time recently, 1972's Aguirre, The Wrath of God, directed by Werner Herzog, one of the original feel-good directors, and starring Klaus Kinski, a real-life demented monster. If you've seen any of Herzog's films, they're not fast films, but if you do have any interest in his filmography, if you're familiar with his other works, this is definitely one you should see. It was a blatant gap in my film knowledge, and while it's not quite the same kind of summer fun-time blockbuster that we expect from Herzog, it is a fascinating film, and I strongly recommend you see it subtitled, of course. There is a English version, which is actually on YouTube right now, which is where I remember that I should watch it. But the English dub is not well done, and frankly, nothing but pure German carries the raw emotion of Klaus Kinski's insane ramblings. Like I said, not going to do a review of this one. It's a film that's had a lot of analysis at this point, requires far more in-depth an examination than I'm going to do here. But the basic plot is that it's a semi-historical account of an expedition by Spanish conquistadors in the jungles of Peru on an ill-fated expedition to find the lost city of gold. Spoiler, they don't find it, and it's basically just a descent into madness and horror as Aguirre takes over the expedition and descends into insanity. If that sounds like your idea of a good time, have at it. The one noteworthy part about this, because I did, like I said, I found the film kind of fascinating. It's definitely got a specific feel, specific atmosphere to it, and because it was a semi-historical epic, I kind of wanted to find out a little bit more about the actual events. It turns out, well, basically that Herzog just made up the whole story. The characters, several of the characters are real-life people, or were, obviously, but they are all fictionalized, and there was no expedition to El Dorado, as depicted here. What is a little unusual is that for the character of Aguirre specifically, he is based on an actual Spanish soldier, Lope de Aguirre, who gave himself the nickname Wrath of God, which should be your first clue of how pleasant the fellow was. At first glance, given how nuts Aguirre is in the movie, staging a mutiny, murdering natives, it makes sense that Herzog would have basically taken some rotten guy from history and made this exaggerated version of him, this over-the-top comical bad guy of him. But what is weird is that when you actually look into the historical Lope de Aguirre, is that he was actually worse than the Aguirre that is depicted in the movie. I'm talking about a character that has Klaus Kinski portraying him. That's hardcore. Like in the movie, Aguirre was involved in mutiny attempts and displayed cruelty towards the native people, but this is true. After he was sentenced to public flogging for his crimes in the jungle, he spent months stalking the judge who sentenced him to the flogging, forcing the judge to move several times over the course of several months, until Aguirre successfully tracked him down and murdered him. Also true, the murder attempt occurred in the judge's sleep. Aguirre stabbed the judge twice, but the judge was wearing chainmail because he lived his life in a state of utter terror from the madman Aguirre, and ultimately being unable to penetrate the chainmail, Aguirre stabbed him through the skull. Also of note, in the film, Aguirre's daughter is, spoiler, but I mean, it's a 1972 film. Up your game, people. In the film, Aguirre's daughter is killed by a stray arrow from the jungle, but in real life, towards the end of Aguirre's life, he had declared open war on the Spanish crown, treason that is, and when his army failed to take Panama, he himself murdered his own daughter to make sure that his bloodline would not be tainted by any of his enemies, because clearly that would not have been an improvement. He was eventually captured and shot to death by one of his own soldiers, just another example of the loyalty he inspired. Also his body was beheaded and cut into quarters, with each of those pieces being sent to nearby towns for a warning. Hopefully with a note of explanation attached. That's not the sort of puzzle you want to have to work out by yourself. Anyway, Aguirre, historical hero, humanitarian. And okay, that is all the time we've got for today. I thank you very much for sticking with us on this extremely light news day. Hopefully next time we'll have something more substantial. Anyway, if you enjoyed the time with us, be sure to subscribe, leave a comment. We always like comments. Make sure to hit the notification button if you ever want to hear from us again. And if you want to support us directly, head on over to our Patreon. The link is in the description. Comics, videos, and games, they get stuff first, and they get exclusive stuff. Until next time, this is Norm wishing you all happy trails, and we'll see you next time. Norm away. Like the video gamers? We have more such wonders to show you, and all you have to do is subscribe and hit the notifications button.
I mean, you don't have to.
Also consider becoming a patron by following the link to our Patreon page, where we turn your cash into videos, comics, and games using the darkest of dark magics.
But mostly just cash.